Good morning. You know, it's interesting. I just have to make this observation. A while back, I wrote a commentary where I said that we needed an environmental impact study if they're going to talk about comprehensive reform, saying it kind of tongue-in-cheek, thinking about the plight of the snail darter, if you guys remember that story. So why is nobody at least as concerned about the plight of Americans? And so I had written that piece, and so it's very interesting that Leon wrote that article, and he and I both are affiliated with Californians for Population Stabilization. I've been working with them for many years, very proud of it. So it's good to get together with Leon today and to see my friends from CAPS and elsewhere. I was with the INS for 30 years, and I really took the scenic tour. I started as an inspector, did that job for about 4 years, spent a year as an adjudications officer doing the marriage interviews like we've seen in the movies. In 1976, with less than a year in as an agent, I stumbled upon a PLO plot to blow up an Israeli oil refinery at Haifa. Thank God we prevented it, and from that point forward, I had a wonderful working relationship with the Israeli National Police. But it was also my introduction to an important issue, the nexus between effective immigration law enforcement and the war on terror. There is no way that you can be successful in combating people, criminals, terrorists, who by their nature, by their mission, need to travel in order to go about their deadly preparations. In fact, if you look at the 9/11 Commission report, one of the key issues was the way they were able to travel, they meaning the terrorists. In fact, the 9/11 Commission staff wrote a special report, the 9/11 Commission staff report on terrorist travel, a monograph. And this was a volume that was about 500 pages long. And it was all about how they traveled, how they got identity documents. So, you know, I'm sure you've all seen Indiana Jones. If you remember when Harrison Ford's character got involved with that fight with the guy, the backstory was he was sick as a dog. They were supposed to have a protracted fight. He just wanted to go back to the trailer. So he pulled his gun out and shot the guy. Well, in the immigration debate, you can pull out a gun also, and I'll tell you what the gun is. And there's no answer to it. This is the knockout punch. Confront any politician from either party who favors giving lawful status and identity documents to illegal aliens. Simply ask them, how does your proposal square with the findings of the 9/11 Commission? The party is over. We're being told about the threats being posed by ISIS, other terrorist organizations. Well, let me read something. This is the beginning of the 9/11 Commission staff report. This is the first paragraph in the preface where they lay out the whole premise. It is perhaps obvious to state that terrorists cannot plan and carry out attacks in the United States if they're unable to enter the country. Yet prior to September 11, while there were efforts to enhance border security, no agency of the U.S. government thought of border security as a tool in the counterterrorism arsenal. Indeed, even after 19 hijackers demonstrated the relative ease of obtaining a U.S. visa and gaining admission into the United States, border security still is not considered a cornerstone of national security policy. We believe, for reasons that we discuss in the following pages, that it must be made one. Right off the top, on 9/11, we had 26 visa waiver countries. Do you know how many visa waiver countries we have today? 38. So right from the top, they said, we've got to tighten up the way we give visas to people. So we go from 26 on 9/11. It took George W. Bush until August 2002 to suspend the transit without visa program. That should have been suspended 10 minutes after the towers fell in Manhattan. I'm a New Yorker. You know, I did my first congressional hearing about the nexus between visa fraud, immigration fraud, May 20th, 1997, 4.5 years before 9/11. And the reason for that hearing were the two terrorist attacks carried out inside the United States in 93. First, January 93, an individual by the name of Kansi, a Pakistani national who had applied for political asylum, repaid America's kindness, compassion, generosity, stood outside CIA headquarters with an AK-47 in January 93 and opened fire. He killed 2 CIA officers and wounded 3 others, fled the country, because you see, foreign nationals who commit crimes in America, who commit attacks in America, have an escape hatch they can depart through. It's called getting out of the country, getting out of Dodge, and very often out of the long reach of our law enforcement. Not in the case of Kansi, however. He was brought back, put on trial, found guilty, and executed, but that didn't bring back the dead. 1 month later, first attack at the World Trade Center. 6 dead, well over 1,000 injured, over $500 million in damages inflicted on that complex. and the Clinton administration did nothing. I met with friends of mine over at the FBI, DEA, ATF. We were all working together. I was part of the drug task force. Everybody thought this was that watershed moment for immigration. How could they ignore it now? Well, not only did they ignore it, but they implemented a program known as CUSA, Citizenship USA, where they ran over 1 million applications for U.S. citizenship through the process, and district directors around the country were warned that if they did not approve, not adjudicate, but approve a quota of applications, they would be fired. They'd be left at the curb like yesterday's trash. This is how bad it was. And afterwards, see, everybody maligns the federal employees, and our conservative friends always like to beat up on unions and civil servants. I heard yesterday the Breitbart reporter talking about privatizing immigration enforcement. That's enough to freak me out, to be honest with you. Law enforcement is a mission for the federal government and state and city governments. You don't want to privatize the military, and you don't want to privatize law enforcement. And so this notion that, you know, we're the bad guys, listen, these guys want to do the job. I can't tell you how many phone calls I get, how many emails I get, how angry, furious Border Patrol agents are, special agents are. They understand the dangers here. And the tactic of our opponents is to marginalize us. And how do they do that? They tell us, well, you're anti-immigrant. How many times have we heard that? My own background, my mother came here as a 14-year-old girl ahead of the Holocaust. I was named for my grandmother, who was slaughtered in Poland during the war. I was a B'nai B'rith president. I'm a big fan of political asylum. However, there's no integrity to the process. Therein lies the issue. Let me just move forward to something that I want to make sure I get in, because my time is very limited today. This is on page 47 of that 9/11 Commission staff report. So when people say we've got to legalize people, we can't deport them all, this is the only area of law enforcement where everybody moans and says, oh, there's just too many to do anything about it. As bad as it is, I still think we have more American motorists with cell phones than we have illegal aliens in the United States. I've never heard a mayor or a chief of police say we can't do anything about texting because there's too many damn people with telephones and driver's licenses. So why can't we do anything about enforcing our immigration laws? You want to create a deterrence. Of course you're not going to arrest every single one. What law gets 100% enforcement? What law gets 1% enforcement? It's about creating a deterrence to convince people that if you break the law and that flying fickle finger of fate lands on your square, you're screwed. Thank you, Frank. So let's go to this notion of giving people identity documents. And by the way, we're told that we can't use the word alien. It's hate speech. You know what the definition of alien is? Any person not a citizen or national of the United States. There's no insult, only clarity to be found in that definition. And if you use the word, they want to hang you. Under one circumstance, however, it becomes not only acceptable but palatable. Does anybody know where the word alien is palatable?
Dream Act.
There you go, the Dream Act. Isn't that remarkable? When we can conjure up the American dream. So let's see what the American dream is. This is on page 47. Once terrorists had entered the United States, their next challenge was to find a way to remain here. Their primary method was immigration fraud. For example, Yusuf and Ajaj concocted bogus political asylum stories when they arrived in the United States. Mahmoud Abu Alima, involved in both the World Trade Center and landmark plots, received temporary residence under the Seasonal Agriculture Worker Program after falsely claiming he picked beans in Florida. So if this is an issue, immigration fraud, why would people want to process millions of applications for aliens who evaded the inspections process? The final knockout punch, and believe me, there's nowhere to go after this. This is on page 98. This is all verifiable. Terrorists in the 1990s, as well as the September 11th hijackers, needed to find a way to stay in or embed themselves in the United States if their operational plans were to come to fruition. As already discussed, this could be accomplished legally by marrying an American citizen, achieving temporary worker status, or applying for asylum after entering. In many cases, the act of filing for an immigration benefit sufficed to permit the alien to remain in the country until the petition was adjudicated. Terrorists were free to conduct surveillance, coordinate operations, obtain and receive funding, go to school and learn English, make contacts in the United States, acquire necessary materials, and execute an attack. Is there any ambiguity in that statement? Why in the world are we processing applications where we can't even do an interview? Do you know how long the interview is for the dreamers? There is no interview. There are no field investigations. I was being driven into Fox News one day, and the driver was from Lebanon. And we engaged in a little back and forth conversation. And I asked him, without getting into what I was doing and where I worked, I said, wow, with that accent, where are you from? He said, Lebanon. I said, boy, it must have been hard to make papers. He said, oh no, the Reagan administration were a bunch of idiots. And I said, oh? He said, well, America is known around the world for being really stupid. It warmed my heart to hear those words, you could imagine. I said, how stupid are we? I felt like Ed McMahon playing to Johnny Carson. He said, well, all you had to say is I worked on a farm. I said, did you? He said, hell no. But by writing down that I worked on a farm, I brought in my wife, my 6 children, my 5 brothers, my 3 sisters, their spouses, and their children, all because I said I worked on a farm. And the idiots never checked it. Everybody in Lebanon, in my town, came to America, and we were all farmers, but none of us would even know where a farm is. Our borders are our first and last line of defense. And when we hear this nonsense that it's anti-immigrant, you see, we're not anti-immigrant. If you want to lose a debate, my background is, I have a degree in communications arts and sciences, or as I prefer to say, I have a BA and BS. But I was on the debating teams in high school and college, and I don't think any kid should be able to graduate with a high school diploma or a college degree without at least a year on the debating team at each of their schools. It's the only place you'll learn how to ask the questions rather than answer the questions. Never, ever allow your opponents to define you. Never, ever allow your opponents to intimidate you. We are not anti-immigrant, but we've been given that label. The other side is called pro-immigrant. I mean, this is a stroke of genius. It all started with Jimmy Carter, who gerrymandered congressional seats and electoral votes by mandating that immigration agents make no arrests during the census. So he started this nonsense of, well, you can't call an illegal alien an illegal alien. It was recommended we call them undocumented workers. Well, I said, well, if I'm told I can't use the word illegal alien, I don't like his choice, so I came up with a new choice, and it kind of caught on. I started to call them pre-citizens. You could see where that's going, and it actually did catch on. This is outrageous. You see, we're pro-enforcement. No one wants to be anti-anything, and we've been backed into a corner because we have been wishy-washy and cowards, I have to tell you. See, how can you be anti-immigrant when you're pro-enforcement? Because the immigration laws that I enforced and administered for 30 years are balanced. Yes, they tell us who to kick out and who to keep out, but they also tell us who to let in. And every year we admit more than 1 million lawful immigrants. Lawful, under those laws, the Immigration and Nationality Act. So how in the world am I anti-immigrant when I supported the laws by which aliens legally immigrate? It makes absolutely no sense. But if you listen to the media, we're anti-immigrant for insisting on enforcing the laws by which we admit more immigrants than the rest of the world combined. We naturalize over 500,000 new citizens every year under those very same laws. This is not anti-immigrant. Would you get on an airplane if you saw people sneak past the TSA? Anybody want a window seat on a cruise missile? Of course not. So why on earth are we being forced to live among millions of foreign nationals who, not unlike the TSA process, snuck past the inspections process conducted at ports of entry that I'm intimately familiar with? And there's nothing in the law about race, religion, or ethnicity. Let me give you the categories of aliens that we're supposed to keep out of the United States. I want you to imagine that vacant house across the street or the apartment down the hallway, and you're living there with your wife and your kids or your husband, whatever, or you're living there alone, I don't care. But you want to live next door to the category. So when you hear something that appeals to you, just raise your hand and I'll acknowledge you, okay? Let's start out with aliens who have dangerous communicable diseases. There you go. What size straitjacket do you wear, sir? Aliens who are mentally ill and prone to violence or sex offenders. There's another. That's great. We have a great bunch of folks here today. Convicted felons, murderers, arsonists, drug traffickers, human smugglers, war criminals, spies, terrorists. Anything appeal to anybody? That's who we're supposed to keep out, and then aliens who would likely become a public charge, or aliens who, if they worked, would either displace an American worker or suppress the wages of American workers. I want to know what's unfair about those laws. Why is that not compassionate to worry about our fellow Americans? Have you ever heard someone yell at somebody for racing into a burning building and pulling their own children out of the fires first? Think about it. We lack compassion because we're concerned about our fellow Americans. 1 in 4 American children right now are living below the poverty line, going to bed hungry at night. And we're being told by Zuckerberg and Gates and all these other thugs and anti-American bums that we need to import foreign workers. And we're hearing it from the politicians from both sides of the aisle. See, this isn't left or right, it's right or wrong. So understand something. Always look, and as an agent I did hundreds if not thousands of interviews and interrogations. You always look for a conflict in what they're saying. So here's the two claims. Our schools are incapable of training engineers, technicians, and other STEM professionals. We've all heard that? That's why we've got to bring in more? Well, guess what, folks? The same politician 3 sentences later will say to you, but when foreign students go to those schools, we should be stapling green cards onto their diplomas. Huh? Think about it. And then we're told, well, the conservatives are on the right side, and they say, oh yeah, like Ted Cruz. Mr. Cruz wants a 500% increase in the number of H-1B visas. Look up Cruz 5 as an amendment to S-744. You know, when we had the first immigration debates about comprehensive reform, I did a bunch of hearings in the House, over in the Senate as well. Senator Sessions liked what I wrote for the Washington Times. I gave comprehensive reform a new title. I called it the Terrorist Assistance and Facilitation Act. I'm working on my candor. I don't know if I'm there yet, but I'm trying hard. But the point of the matter is, how on earth do you think that you're going to have a good situation when you give people who are here illegally, whose identities can't be verified, who've used multiple stolen identities, and give them identity documents, when I've just read to you what the 9/11 Commission staff had to say? See, when I confronted the chairman of a very powerful House committee, and it was just remarkable. He would not answer that question. I think he would have been quicker to share information about his sex life than discuss that with me. It was amazing. His ears were glowing bright red. I was basking in the warmth of this man's ears. And 3 times I tried to get an answer, and 3 times he said, well, we can't deport 11 million. I said, well, it's probably closer to 35 million, but no one's saying we should deport them all. And he got so angry at one point, they thought his ears were going to fly off the side of his head and float away like little butterflies. It's astonishing, because they know they're lying, but they're taking the money. Campaign contributions are little more than legalized bribes. Zuckerberg, Gates, all those anti-American, American-hating executives who tell us, oh, the best and brightest are overseas, have neglected to look at their own birth certificates. They were born here. Isn't that remarkable? Yes, Elon Musk is brilliant, and he's an entrepreneur, and he's a credit to America, but guess what? We admitted him. The system worked. The system worked. I'm not saying keep everybody out. And then I hear, well, you would keep out Albert Einstein? Of course not. But, you know, Ted Cruz wants to bring in 325,000 extraordinary foreign workers. Per year. Right, per year. Do you think there are 325,000 extraordinary people in the world? I mean, this is outrageous. And then, you know, we're hearing about income equality. And in fact, yesterday, the gentleman who spoke, Al, the economist, spoke. And he's wrong, though. You see, they are working mightily to give us income equality. They are. Alan Greenspan was very clear about income equality. On April 30th, 2009, Alan Greenspan spoke before Chuck Schumer. I call him Chuck the Schmuck. He used to be my congressman. He was never my representative. I met with the guy, and it was as pointless as trying to have a conversation with a fire hydrant. Don't confuse him with the facts. They're irrelevant. So Alan Greenspan testifies about this issue of comprehensive reform. And he talks about how we need undocumented workers, even though the Americans don't like them because they're a flexible workforce, and the impact on wages is negligible. Right. Sure. And then he talks about how if we brought in more high-tech workers, they could move into the vacant housing units of Americans that lost their homes. Isn't that a poetic way to describe an American home lost to foreclosure because of his subprime mortgages for illegal aliens, not to mention the credit cards for people whose true identities couldn't be determined? So how in the world do you do a credit check on them? How do you make them accountable? And the answer is you can't. But then he gets to part two, and if anybody here is in need of blood pressure medicine, take it now, avoid the rush later. Because this was the second benefit, quote unquote, to bringing in many more high-tech workers. Are you guys ready? Put your seatbelt on. Greatly expanding our quotas for the highly skilled would lower wage premiums of the skilled over the lesser skilled. Skill shortages in America exist because we are shielding our skilled labor force from world competition. Quotas have been substituted for the wage pricing mechanism, and in the process, we have created, and you're going to love this term, folks, a privileged elite. Okay? A privileged elite whose incomes are being supported at non-competitively high levels by immigration quotas on skilled professionals. Eliminating such restrictions would reduce at least some of our income inequality. Folks, what they want to do is actually cut inequality in wages, not between the middle class and the wealthy, but between the middle class and the poor by lowering the wages of the middle class. You know, I got on the elevator today, and before I got on the elevator, I looked to see which way the arrows were pointing. Everyone's jumping on the elevator of wage equality and not looking to see which way the elevator is going. It's going down, way down. And when people complain about the $15 an hour minimum wage, being a lifelong Democrat, I'm in favor of the $15 an hour minimum wage. You need to pay people enough money to justify setting your alarm clock in the morning. However, the folks on the other side who get upset about it, I tell them, don't get that upset, because if these bums, if these anti-American, self-hating Americans get their way, the minimum wage, God forbid, will become America's standard wage.